If you are a victim of domestic violence or partner violence, please call your local police department or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. There are resources available to help you and your family. Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast, The Murder of Lydia Cassady, Part 4.
I think at first, the coroner had thought that she was shot from behind. And I think that was one of our things, for me anyways, it was like my saving grace going, oh, she never knew this was coming. Like he just came from behind and killed her. So that was one of those things that kind of, it's awful to say that gave me comfort, but it gave me comfort.
Yeah, you were thinking at least she didn't know.
Yeah. But that's not ultimately what happened. And, when Michael, the coroner's office, took her body to Frankfurt, and Cassie stayed with her the whole time. And they did the actual autopsy to really find out. There was a lot of questions that day. There was a Pandora ring box and a Pandora bag. No ring found. And that was supposedly the ring that he wanted to marry her with, kind of thing. And Cassie kept asking me from the coroner's office, she kept asking me, Carolyn, you know anything about the fingers and her ring fingers and things like that? And I kept going, no, what do you mean? And she's like, well, her fingers were broken. And so, of course, again, myself, my sister, my niece, we're all true crime junkies, like Dateline, ID, and for years and still. And, I just said to her, I don't know. I said, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's something twisted about the fact that she wouldn't marry him. So maybe he broke her fingers.
Yeah.
I don't know. And so what ended up coming out of the autopsy when Michael called, he's such a, again, can't say enough about that group. But when he called me, he was like, Carolyn, because he said, well, we'll find out kind of everything at this autopsy. It's up to you whether you want to know all of that. Or I said, absolutely. I want to know everything, as much as you can tell me. And so, I think that night, their bedroom, it was pretty small. And the reason it was so small is they had a huge king size bed in that room with two big dressers. And so really from the door to the side of the bed, there was just this little walkway kind of thing, like almost like just a straight path from the door to the wall, because and pretty much you almost had to get in on this one side. There was very little space on this other side. And so what we think happened to her, based on what the coroner says and kind of where it's at, is he walked into that room and at point blank range, he shot her in the head, and she did know it was coming. She was facing him and she was protecting him, and that's what caused the broken fingers and her ring to be dismantled. And so basically she had her hands like this when he shot her in the head. Oh. And so he did one shot into her head, which killed her, according to them. She then fell on the ground, fell on her glasses, fell down on the ground, and then he administered a kill shot in the back of her head.
Wow.
And then he just left her
and
there.
Then left.
Yeah. And, again, we watch a lot of true crime. So, when all of this happened, we're having to go to the police station, and, this was an active crime scene. So it's like, okay, like we have two children that have all their stuff there.
Exactly.
Like, what do you do with that? And so once they cleared the crime scene, which wasn't too long, it was probably a day, we were able to come back the next day, and they had given us approval to go there with, I can't remember if an officer, I don't think an officer went with it. They'd given us approval to go get the basics.
Sure.
And then they said, well, as soon as we clear this and that, we'll let you come back and get whatever you need. And so again, when you're walking in, I just had my true crime mind, hey, there's splatter everywhere, stuff like that. And there wasn't. I mean, it was, almost like a flip chart size piece of paper, just saturated of blood on the floor and the carpet. Lydia she was on blood thinners because of her heart valve. So, I mean, there was a lot of blood,
Sure.
but it, again, it was just kind of
confined
to one kind of space, which you hate to say that that's a good thing, but it was, it's awful.
Yes.
But, I had this vision of, oh my gosh, this is
going to be
horrid.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it was horrid. Don't get me wrong, but it just wasn't what I was
picturing. I think you build yourself up to expect, because you see it on the shows, like you say, and you build yourself up that it's going to be horrendous. And when it's not, you're kind of relieved, but it still is horrendous. But at least you expected the worst.
And you have that curiosity that comes way too close to home.
Yeah.
That's the sad thing that went through with Wendy and Angie, is that it should never be that way.
Yep.
It should never be that way.
Well, and, and again, where she died or whatever, you were just like, okay, when you walk in, you're just thinking, and I'd asked, of course, what was she wearing, like all the things, and she still had, she had on. Now, again, they had gone to get the vehicle from the shop. And so she still had on, though, like, again, the timeline for her death was between 7 and like 10 or midnight. And so, but she had her tennis shoes still on. She had her jacket on, and the clothes that she had on, were like really frumpy looking clothes, like almost like bedtime, kind of like I'm like in my laid back kind of clothes. And all I kept thinking was, like, she was ready to walk that day. I mean, because again, for her, even at like 8 o'clock, like she was starting to, because she got up really early in the mornings. So I'm like, this argument never stopped until he shot her. Like, so, I think at that point she was ready to go. She wanted to leave.
And maybe even was trying to leave.
Yeah. And I think even to the point that the kids were like, Dad, just let us leave. Like, you can still be part of our life. Like, you got everybody now saying, just let us go.
Yes.
Right? Just let us go. And he wasn't going to let it go.
No. Because even though he had someone else, maybe a few someone else's, they still want that control of that little bit. They don't want to give that up.
I told Wendy that, in my opinion, is because you had asked one time in Angie's, do they plan this? And I said this before we started. And I really believe that they don't plan the hour of the day, but the capacity is there that even though they won't vocalize it to people, that taking the life of that person is a very real thing. And so that mentally, I think they've rehearsed it. It's just when the moment hits, that's why they're so ready to do it. And
because they've thought about it before.
No, that's it. And it becomes just like we're talking about making a rational decision to leave. For them, the rational decision is to just kill somebody.
And you have to wonder if in the back of his mind, that whole time when he's headed to Florida, or when he leaves out the door after he kills her, does he think he's going to kill himself? Does he know that's his end game?
I think that's another.
And I wonder that.
Part. It's either suicide by cop, which is what they were probably talking about.
Yeah.
And then I think, and just like with Anton, same thing, is that's the next step in that, is that there's that, for all that macho in that, is they're extremely coward.
Yeah.
And they're not going to go and sit in a prison over that. I still remember.
And that's what my husband kept saying was,
there we go. And I think Daryl called him right too. And it was what snuck up on me when we started doing a podcast a couple years ago, is that it made me reflect back on the cases that I'd worked when I did this, that you don't think about them in the context of what they are while you're doing them. And then I stepped back and I'm like, holy shit, we had way too many domestic violence cases. But when you're knee deep in them, it's actually not as material. But I remember having one where a guy was breaking up with a younger girl. She worked at a Chevrolet, I think it was a Chevrolet distributor up on Richmond Road in Lexington, middle of the afternoon, and shoots her to death right there at the service counter. Kevin Kelly, a very good friend of mine, was the first one there, and the guy slid the gun to him and gave up. And we go, and he has a tape in his house, and he's videotapes himself smoking a cigarette, and he's saying, well, if you're watching this, I've already killed myself, and I'm very happy with what I did. Well, he chickened out at the very last minute when Kevin got there and slid the gun. But it's like all of that. I guess what I'm getting at is that it's more than capacity, it's planning.
Yes.
But the exact time is what we
And then you have to wonder, like, if that person who did that, if he's out of jail now. And I think and I'm sure for you, because it's for me, and this is only my personal feeling, I'm so glad that it ended with him the way it did, because how horrible would it have been if in 10 years, 15, 12 years, 7 years, he's out.
Yeah.
And then you don't have your person back and they're out knowing what they did.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole that is disgusting.
Yes.
Is that that's the re-victimization of the
victims
of the family. Yeah.
Speaking of that, moving forward, what have you done to metabolize this? Are you active in domestic violence prevention or any groups? Tell us what you do.
We've Cassie and I visited one of the domestic violence forums that they did here in Jessamine County, right a little while after Lydia had passed. And we also, our family kind of started, it's called beehivestrong.com. And it's a website where the kids have, my niece makes some little rings with some jewels on them, some little stones. And there's some swag items, with that. And just to honor her and also to talk about domestic violence. So anyone that orders anything from there, we send them a whole domestic violence information and kind of kit. We've also partnered with Greenhouse 17 on that initiative. So everything we sell, 25% of that goes back to them. And then we've just been really trying to be active with some of the Greenhouse 17. In fact, we're hoping to get out there in the next couple of weeks. We had a young lady who's donated a quilt. We had another lady out of Boston who has made all of these makeup zip bags, little handbags, stuff that you can throw stuff in for the ladies that come to the shelter as well.
Why don't you tell what Greenhouse, because we know.
Yes.
Why don't you tell our listeners, and Darlene Thomas runs it, and she's just wonderful anyway.
She is also.
Why don't you tell what Greenhouse 17 is? Because I know when I first heard it, I thought it's a greenhouse. They must grow things there. And why 17?
Yeah.
So tell what that is.
I probably can't do it as good of justice as obviously Darlene can, but they're a domestic violence shelter out of Lexington, and they help women get on their feet. They provide housing. They provide, even if you don't need housing, they'll provide a active list of resources, necessities that you need. They'll work with you with safety plans, which I think, if you're in a situation like my sister was at the time before she was killed, the safety plan of how to exit, right, and
safely.
Exit safely. And I think that's key. I mean, I just think it's huge. But that organization just does so much. They do have greenhouses on the property. I think that's why they have the name. And I think one of the greatest things too is it's just not a handout. It's a hand up that they give. So when women come and live on the property, they actually have jobs. They grow their own things. They sell their own stuff on their website. They make soaps. I mean, just all kinds of things that they do there to kind of make up and make money to give back, and to provide for the
folks
and
it probably gives them a sense of, I'm doing something.
Well, and safety
I'm
too, because when we say property, nobody really knows where Greenhouse 17
That's
is.
Right.
Is that even as a police officer, you'll go to your grave with what that location is. It's not shared with anybody, so that when you take somebody there, you can assure them that nobody is going to get to you there. And they have really hard rules for
and it's secured.
Clients.
And I mean, it's more like a prison, not a prison, but the way it's set up is to keep people out, right?
Because sometimes these women, I can imagine, probably get in there and then they get feeling a little remorseful of maybe I shouldn't have done this, or maybe he really didn't mean it like that. And then you don't want them calling saying, okay, I'll leave and we'll be together again. Because Lord knows he's talking it up, or whoever their abuser is.
You're coming right back to that whole difficult part about that is the psychological breakdown that happens on that in the codependencies and the different types. We had Jai Hamilton with Animal Control just come in and talk about the use of pets as bargaining to empower tools in domestic violence. And Kentucky finally has an EPO section where a judge can order a pet in.
Well, and I think one of the things recently, if I'm correct, that I've seen on greenhouses, they've given the greenhouse 17 a certain amount of those individuals. They've given them the authority to issue out EPOs now.
That is
so
super
there's been a
good.
handful
really
of
great.
those that have been kind of deputized, if you will, or gone through that process to be able to issue those, I believe.
To get over the barrier of time.
That's right. Because time is of the essence.
And because courts are not 24/7.
Yep.
And, to be able to get down and get a worker and see somebody at a window to swear to the affidavit is a big pain. And then judges aren't on all the clock. I used to go to judges' houses at 3:30 and 5 in the morning.
Well, and we were in the same situation. We had to get an EPO against him when he was on the run. And so, I mean, it took us a while, and again, Scott County guys were great, but it does take a lot of time. I mean,
no, absolutely. So, just for clarity, Beehive Strong.
Yep.
BEHIV.
It's just
B, just like the bumblebee.
Okay.
Well, it's just B.
B.
Oh, B.
The letter B. Hive, HIVE, strong.com.
I'm glad I clarified.
I should have brought down the bumblebee shirt we got because I have it upstairs.
Too,
we'll splash it on the screen for the YouTube version.
Yes.
But I just want to direct people to go and support that too.
Yes, there's shirts, there's hats,
all
there's
kinds of
little
swag. Yep.
bumblebees that are crocheted. Like I said, Jasper had gotten one when we came to your house. He wanted one.
Yep.
So yes, support that organization.
For sure.
As well as Greenhouse 17. They're both wonderful.
Since we're listened to internationally, and probably most regions have something similar to Greenhouse 17. Yep. Probably not as many as we'd like. And again, if you're really in a pinch with this, or you're concerned about a friend, is that I'm going to give the number out one more time.
I will do that if you'd like, sir. Know that you are not alone. You don't have to be a victim. And it's scary to leave. I can't imagine what Lydia and Angie went through. But find your strength for yourself or your loved ones and get out. If you're a victim of domestic violence or partner violence, reach out to your local police department or the National Domestic Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. Keep yourself safe. Be your own advocate.
Yeah. And I would say just to add to that is, as a family member, look for the signs.
Yes.
I mean, the signs are, it's really crazy when you look at the signs of when a domestic violence situation is happening, the partner will take them away from the core support that they have. So they'll remove any friends, family, because they want to relieve those barriers. So the control factor will happen. You won't have those friends that you always had. You won't be able to go see that family like you always were able to see that family. They will start to determine what you're spending, when you're spending, where you're going, what you're doing. They'll want to know where you're at every moment of the day. If those things are happening to you, please seek help. I think anytime you're in those situations where they're controlling who you're talking to, how often you're talking to, your circle, just remember your circle. That was your circle before you met that person. And if they're not still your circle, there's a problem.
Yes.
There's a problem. And
so
especially.
Well said. So well said.
Yes. So please, if you are a victim of domestic or partner violence, please reach out to your local police department or your National Domestic Violence Hotline. Again, that is 1-800-799-7233. You are not alone. I promise you there's resources out there. You can do this.
Absolutely.
Carolyn, thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm very blessed to be here. And
no, we're blessed to have you talk, and again, so articulately
yes.
and everything. Painted such a picture of Lydia, and probably we're going to help a lot of people by letting them see the nuances of what this
yes,
behavior
and also
like.
Because, like you had mentioned before, we've done many domestic violence episodes on our show. You just don't think it can happen to you. You think that's somebody else.
Right.
That's never going to happen to my person.
Yeah. Well, and if, again, I think my husband will probably tell you differently. I mean, even though I knew he was a bad guy, like I knew in my heart, like, you got to get out of this. You got to get out of this. I never thought he would shoot her twice. Like right there in the head. That was just not something that my mind could rationalize. And but it will. It can
yes.
happen. And that's what I tell, any friend of mine or anybody that I come in contact with, that I even see the hints of this stuff. I'm the first one to say, look, let me tell you where my sister is. She's 5 minutes down the road, 6 feet under.
Yes.
Now, don't be like her. Get out.
Yes.
Get out. Like it's not worth any of that.
No.
Get out safely. Get out safely.
Yes. And if your gut is talking to you, you're right.
You better listen
you
to it.
better listen. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Caroline, for taking the time to come share Lydia's story with us. And thank you so much. I know you wouldn't have it any other way, but for raising her children.
They're blessings.
I know that they're so lucky to have you and your husband. And so thank you so much for coming.
I appreciate being here. Thank you.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.